Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com and also WFOV 92.1. And we're glad to have you with us this afternoon. We're back in our studio. As you can see, those of you that are tune us in at allpointstv.com. For those of you in the listening audience and cannot see us, I just want you to know that we're back finally after being away for about 3 weeks from the studio. We were doing the taping away from the studio the last 3 weeks. 2 of those weeks in my own home, and then went over to John's house, the engineer, and had our taping over there. But we are now back home, and so we're feeling very good about the fact that the studio is no longer down because of global cooling. You know, everybody talks about global warming. We were the victims of the fact that we had an ice situation, and some of the wires got tangled in the storm. And so the studio was, in fact, down because of the global cooling. So I guess global cooling is caused by global warming.
All I can say is, after this incident, I just really regret not taking like a doing vocational training. Well, I did welding, but I should have become an electrician. I would have saved myself a crap load of money. Yeah, a lot of money.
Yeah, and so... Yeah, if that's another indication of, they say global warming is caused by global cooling. So we are the victims of climate change. Okay, let's get into our subject. We've got a lot of things we want to talk about today. This is we're taping on Christmas Eve, and we are continuing to do the programs no matter what the weather conditions are. And no matter what the season is, we will come to you on the regular time and try to put together a quality program, such as today's program. And we're going to cover a couple of topics here. And I don't even know, as I said last week, I don't even know where to start. There's much to cover in terms of what is going on and how we are being deluded by these criminals running this country. These politicians are destroying America from within. And I want to make a case for that and try to document what's really going on here, because the problems we're facing in this country are systemic. And if we think that one person in one election is going to correct this problem, and that we can bring an outsider inside the network, and that individual will go in and be able to, quote unquote, drain the swamp. I can tell you that this problem is bigger than, I don't care what the intentions are, this problem is bigger than electing someone from the outside.
Remember Ross Perot? I mean, I was a big supporter of Ross Perot because he was the outsider. But it takes somebody like a Ross Perot or somebody with, or like Donald Trump with the deep pockets. And then just look at what they're doing to him. Trump's happening to him with his own party. I mean, that goes to show you, again, we've made that point, I think, when he first got elected. He was the third-party candidate. For all practical intensive purposes, he was the third-party candidate. He really was. Even though he had the R after his name, he was the third-party candidate.
There is certainly a case to be made for going to the outside to bring someone in that has not been a part of the beltway or the part of the problem or part of the institution that have brought about this calamity in this country and around the world. But I want to make a case today for the problem not lending itself to being corrected by an individual. And if we can go back and understand how we got here, you'll see that as clearly as I see it, having done the research to show that this problem is embedded in the way that they have this system set up, and is based upon a false premise that goes back a long way from the present time, at least back to 1944 with the Bretton Woods Conference. And I want to talk about that before we get off the air today. But let me start off by reading from this book by Judge Napolitano. who I'm losing more and more patience with him. But there are some things that he does say in his book called "It is Dangerous to Be Right When the Government is Wrong: The Case for Personal Freedom." I do like some of the points he makes in some of his writings, but Judge Napolitano is really getting on my nerve with some of the things he's saying on Fox. And Fox is getting on my nerve too, as a matter of fact. They have too many politicians on there now. If you're going to bring these politicians on the network and have them to discussing the nature of the problems in this country, every one of their comments being a matter of them distracting the public from the role they're playing in the problem, and then bring them on there as if they're going to import some solutions to the problem that they're caused. I'm going to try my best to disabuse you of the notion that there's any correction to be made by your politicians, even though they have the best of intentions. And I think Donald Trump has the best of intentions, but Donald Trump cannot solve this problem. And I'm going to try to show that to be the case by talking about what's going on right now, and also talking about what happened that brought about this calamity. We are in a calamitous situation right now, and I want to talk about the foundation of that, because I want you to understand who these politicians are, and also to understand what you mean by the deep state, which a lot of people are talking about, but do not understand what you mean by that, because they're confused about it. They're confused about it also. So we'll get into some of those things today in our discussion. But let me start off. I'm going to read something from the book by Napolitano, who is becoming, as I said earlier, less and less my favorite person on TV. It's amazing what's going on in this country and what's going on around the world. Okay, let me read something from Napolitano's book. It's dangerous to be right when the government is wrong. On page 263, it says, government rejects its moral and legal obligation, insulates itself from litigation, breaks its own laws, makes its own rules, declares worthless paper to be money, and then devalues even that. Government will not hesitate to use force upon those who challenge it. Government has made it unlawful to resist its use of force, even when those uses are patently and unconditionally wrong. Let me read that again. Government rejects its moral and legal obligations, insulates itself from litigation, that is to say, there's no recourse, no legal recourse from what government does, because you got to go and litigate against the government, and the government is a problem, and you have to go and litigate and bring the case before the government that's a problem in the first place. So it insulates itself from litigation. It breaks its own laws, makes its own rules, declares worthless paper to be money, and then devalues even that money that it has made worthless. Declares worthless paper to be money, and then it even devalues even that. Government will not hesitate to use force upon those who challenge it, and has made it unlawful to resist its use of force, even when those uses of force are patently and unconditionally wrong. Now, I want to start there because it ties into a conversation I had this morning with some people that I conversate with on a regular basis. I was asking them to read something that I had done some research on this past weekend. Let me see if I can pull this up. I sent this to one of my friends. I said I was researching the question, quote, how many times did the Feds raise interest rates during Obama's terms in office compared to Trump's tenure in office? and I asked him to read the article online when you get a chance. This title, After Raising Rates Once During the Obama Years, the Fed Promises Constant Rate Hikes During the Trump Era. And I put down there, there can no longer be any reasonable doubt that the power centers are all working together to get Trump out of power. And they understand, and I'm talking about these clever politicians, the deep state. You call it the deep state, which means that you graduated from what you used to call it, because you used to think there was the quote unquote the Illuminati that was over the government, and they were dictating to the government, who supposedly, according to that analysis, would be people of virtue, and they're being set upon by someone above the government that's dictating to these wonderful people that have virtue, and if they can only carry out what they went there to do, because they are, civil servants and they're public servants who want to do the public will, and so they're being set upon by this outside force above them, more powerful than they are. And if only they could carry out the virtue of which they went to Washington to carry out and do the people's will, they would be able to do that. But this group above them, it has them doing other things. The lobbyists, for example. And so this notion that they're being set upon by an outside force, and all you have to do is change some of the bodies inside of the network to solve the problem, I can tell you right now, that may well be what you think it is. That will not solve the problem. And I know exactly why the United States went outside and got Donald Trump and elected him president of the United States. But they intend to bring this man down by what the Fed is doing. They understand that part of Donald Trump's strength is the economy that is seemingly recovering because of the stock market going up. And that's an illusion also. You may think that the economy is on sounder footing because the stock market is being improved. And what the Fed is doing right now to take that away from Trump is they are raising the interest rates. And they raised it 3 times already, and they intend to raise it every quarter through 2019. There was an article this morning showing that the Dow has taken another dive of 600 points from the stock market. And it continues to go down. It's now around, 23,000, and that's artificially inflated. And they intend to continue to attack the stock market through the raising of the interest rates, because they recognize that as long as people feel some relief in their pockets, they're willing to overlook some of the other things that are going on. And of course, everything Donald Trump does, they're making it an issue. So they intend to attack, and when I say they, I want to identify who I mean by they, because I want to be very specific here. The Federal Reserve, which is a criminal enterprise, as is the central banking network in this country and around the world. All central banks are criminal enterprises. Let's get that straight right now.
Founding fathers feared a central bank, and this what we got now, more than it is standing military. I mean, that's right telling right there, because they knew that whoever controlled the money controlled the country.
Who was it that said that, John? Who was that person that said that if to control the money, if I can control the money, I care not who are the political person in office?
Rothschild. Lord Rothschild said that, yep.
Those who control the money and can, in fact, regulate the interest rates and regulate the money supply and things of that sort, you care not who is in positions, political positions, because the money or the lack therein is what really runs a society. That is not unlike what Ayn Rand says in her book called the New Intellectuals, or you can go read the book by Murray Rothbard, whose book is called The Fed and the Monetary System. Or go read Ludwig van Mises' his work, or read his students' work, The Road to Serfdom.
Hayek, yeah.
Hayek.
Yeah, Frederick Hayek.
Frederick Hayek. What I'm trying to get to, and I hope I can make the case that can make it clear, because there are a lot of complexities involved in it, but I'm going to try to see if I can make it so that it becomes comprehensive to the reading public, because it is designed to be complex, because they're hiding what really is going on in this country and around the world. And I don't think you can understand what's going on in this country and the role this country is playing in problems around the world until you go back to 1944. To something that's not going to be discussed in any classroom. I don't care what class you go to. I don't care what university that you are attending. I don't care what classes you take. There's not going to be one class that's going to talk about the Bretton Woods Conference of 1944, which is what we have to talk about to understand what's happening right now. The Bretton Woods Conference that took place in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, at the end of World War II, was where 44 allied nations came together to decide what are they going to do in the aftermath of World War II coming to a close, where the economies of the world have been devastated. The question was, now that the war was winding down in 1944, what are they going to do when the war comes to a close and they now have to rebuild these societies? Because Western Europe had been devastated. Really the whole world that was involved in the war had been devastated, particularly where the war was actually being fought on the land space, and it was basically fought in Europe and in the South Pacific in terms of Japan. It had not come to the Western Hemisphere because we got involved in the war only in 1942, after Roosevelt sold the war through the creating the conditions in the South Pacific through which Hiroshima and Nagasaki would later on be bombed in retaliation for what had happened in Pearl Harbor on December the 7th, 1941. All of this being orchestrated, by the way, as a way of getting the U.S. involved in the war, because we were isolationists from World War I to World War II. So how are we going to get involved in this war? And what Roosevelt did to sell this war was, in fact, create conditions in the South Pacific to strangle Japan, and then expecting retaliatory measures to be taken against the United States. And when it did happen, we now have an excuse to get involved in World War II, and we declared war on Japan and on its allies the very next day on December the 8th, 1941. And we're revving up now the military machinery. And in 1942, we're ready now to join in this war, and we began to fight it in Europe, which is what our game plan was, to start the war there, and then to deal with Japan and the South Pacific in the aftermath of getting the war removed from Europe under the allies that were there. Now, when the World War II had devastated these economies, the question is, what are you going to do to reconstruct these societies in the aftermath of World War II? And that's what they're meeting for in Bretton Woods, isolated area in New Hampshire. 700 and some allied ambassadors and diplomats met in New Hampshire to discuss that issue. How are we going to rebuild in the aftermath of this destructive war, the most destructive war the world had ever seen? 50 million people having been incinerated in this war. So the rebuilding has to go on in the aftermath, and the war was winding down, and they're now preparing for the aftermath of it. And they had to decide how they're going to do that. Now, up until 1942, the U.S. was not involved in the war other than supplying the military resources for the war to be fought. And by being on the outside of the war, so to speak, we are producing the instruments for the war. Now, a lot of people say things like this, and they'll say that war is a money-making venture. It is a money-making venture, providing it's not being fought on your soil. For those that are involved in fighting the war and is being fought on their soil, it's devastating. Look what happened in England. Look what happened in France. Look at what happened in all of Europe in terms of the armaments of war going into those territories. Those territories were devastated. The U.S. is producing instruments of war, so it is benefiting from it. And they are, in fact, we are selling goods because they are on a war footing, so we are supplying the goods that they need to survive in Europe while they are making what? War materials. We're supplying all the rest of the goods to them. And what are they doing in return? They are bringing gold to buy the goods from the United States as we're producing goods for all the allies throughout the world. So we are now, so at the end of this war in 1944, America has 70% of the gold reserves that are in the known world at this time. 70% of all the gold in the world is in the United States. So then the Allied powers, when the war is winding down, are meeting in the United States to decide how they're going to reconstruct the economies of the world based upon the country that has the greatest economic engine, that they can base their currency on, the currency not of their nations, because they've given the gold through the trade to the United States. So then the idea would be they want to base their currency upon the United States currency because they can base the U.S. currency on the gold. Now, before that, the gold was $20 for every ounce of gold. It was decided at the Bretton Woods Conference that for every ounce of gold, the U.S. would print $35. So therefore we have, and I wrote this down where I would not forget it as I was writing my notes out. I wrote down what money is. I wrote this down as I was taking some notes because I want to stay focused here because there's so many different angles to it. But I want to try to be very clear here. Money is a standard measure of value. That is saying that it has to have a standard of value. It cannot be this up today, down tomorrow. It's just like a gallon of gas, a gallon of milk, a gallon of orange juice. If you have a standard measure of value, or let's say it a different way. You want to bake a cake. A cake is baked by the same ingredients. It cannot be something today and then something the next day. So it's a standard in which you bake the cake at a certain temperature. You put the ingredients in there. So that's a standard measure of how you do a cake. A standard value, a measure of money is that it must be consistent. So they said they're going to have the dollar, a standard value of the dollar, print $35 for every ounce of gold. That's the agreement. And then we'll base the rest of the currency of the world based upon that standard. Wouldn't you know you're talking to politicians here? These are politicians. And one thing about a politician, I don't care where you go and see them. A politician's word is not worth anything, even as written on paper. The Native Americans found it out in the United States, and people around the world have found the same thing out. Their word is not worth a quarter. What they say, by them even opening their mouth to say anything. I'm talking about all politicians. and just as bad here as they are anywhere else. And this idea, I keep hearing them on TV. To think this could happen, this is not supposed to happen here. It happens in Russia, and yet they're talking about it here. It don't just happen in Russia. It happens wherever you have politicians. Okay, I got to take a break here. But I'm telling you that they made an agreement to print only as much paper. That's what, it's not money, it's currency. To print as much paper as they could back up with gold. And they print the paper at $35 an ounce. And they went away from the Bretton Woods Conference, the idea they're going to have that as a standard measure of value of the dollar. Dollars backed up, every $35 you print, we backed up by 1 ounce of gold, and all the currency of the world, we based upon that standard. And then what the politicians did in this country, the United States of America, where it's not supposed to happen here, it only happens in Russia, they began to look at the opportunity to print more money, more currency, than they had gold. In fact, they did that through the Marshall Plan. When the war came to a close, they decided they're going to monetize the reconstruction of Europe. And with the Marshall Plan, they just printed money and placed it in Europe to rebuild Europe. And this is when Charles de Gaulle of France got very curious about all this paper circulating in Europe. And it looked like there was more paper circulating in Europe than they had the gold at $35 an ounce to back it up. So what de Gaulle did was say, okay, that's fine. You got this currency circulating in Europe. Let's see if it is in fact backed up by $35 for every ounce of gold. Let's send the currency back, the paper back to the United States. And they tried to act like they could cover those dollars in circulation, but they got caught because they kept making demand for them to send the gold for the paper that they put out there. And they tried to act like they could cover those dollars out there. They were trying to act like they had not printed above $35 an ounce of gold, and they did that from 1959 to 1971, but then they kept demanding more and more of the gold, and then the game was up. And Richard Nixon had no other choice in the matter but to take the U.S. off of the gold standard. But by doing that, understand this. By taking the United States off the gold standard, it took the entire world off the gold standard at the same time. And it created fiat currencies all over the world. I am telling you nothing but the absolute truth here. I'm right and they're wrong. This problem can't be corrected by Donald Trump, nor anyone else, because the entire world right now is on a bubble that will at some point burst. It cannot be avoided. They have created an entire structure around the world that's based upon nothing other than the government word that the currency out there is worth something. And here's what's going to bring about the bubble bursting, and that is that people are going to catch on to that. For example, in Brazil, we send them paper and they send us coffee. We send Japan paper and they send us cars. Okay, they're back from WFOV. I'm here with this rant because, and I'm very nervous about what was going to happen, and it has happened because this bubble is going to burst, and I don't know how we protect ourselves from it. Because when this bubble bursts, it's going to make 1929 look like Sunday school. Because the whole world is in this calamitous situation. And it's caused here by the United States. The U.S. caused this problem. And so when you have the world trading in paper, and that's what they're trading in, paper. There's no money. There is no money in the economic system in the United States. And I think what's the danger right now is that they got to blame somebody for what's inevitable, and Donald Trump comes along at the right time so that the inevitable bubble bursting can be placed on Donald Trump's watch and make it appear that the outsider caused this. This problem is not caused by anything going on right now, by the current situation. This problem is caused from 1944. You can go back there and trace it from 1944 up to the present time. If you want to go beyond 44, go back to 1913 with the creation of the Federal Reserve System in the United States that the framers were against. All governments have always done this in one way or another. All governments have always inflated the currency as a way of paying for the excesses of government. They did it in Rome. For example, the way Rome did it, and it's not different now, the way Rome did it is that they did what they call gold clippings. Let us say when they put gold coins out there, what they did was they would clip the edges of the coin. And so if you go back to the time of Rome, you'll see some of those coins are square. That's because what they did was to clip the edges of the coins off so they could take the edges and then melt it down and then mix it with some other coinage like copper or zinc, or copper and zinc make bronze, and put that in there and evaluate it that way. But so that you can make more gold currency by putting a gold coating on the outside and then make more gold currency. But it's not total gold anymore because it's been devalued with other metals you put in there and mix with it. Now, if you don't think they're doing that now, I'll tell you what you can do. Take your silver coin and look to the side of it and ask yourself, what is that red stuff coming through there? Now, on the outside, there's a gold coating, right? But on the edges, you can see seeping through the silver, you can see seeping through it a brown color. I don't care what coins you look at. The modern coin have that brown edges on it. What is that brown edge? That's copper. So the devaluation of the coin, the coin currency, is through them mixing silver with the copper. That's the way you devalue the currency.
Remember years ago in the 50s or 60s, the average wage was maybe $1 an hour, $2 an hour. But if you actually took the coins, the quarters, and and keep in mind, people got to remember this. The Constitution gives the government a right to mint, to do coins, not print money, print currency, like folding currency. So if you actually took those four quarters to a bank, they would have been over... They're worth about $5 or $6, nowadays by our silver standard, by the price of silver. If they were still silver, they'd be worth quite a bit more than they are at the face value now a quarter typically has. So, I mean, they've done this continuously.
These are criminals, John.
They are totally.
I'm telling you, folks, this country is being run like all the countries on the planet. These countries are being run by criminals. These are organized gangsters. You got gangster government in Washington. And if Ayn Rand is correct, and she is correct in saying that a country's money is an indication of a country's virtue. If you take that and understand that point, and then you understand that there is no money in the monetary system of the United States, and therefore, since all the countries of the world are based upon the monetary system of the United States, they say the dollar is the international currency of exchange, and all of them are dependent upon the dollar. If there's no virtue in the dollar here in this country, there's no virtue in the money supply anywhere in the world. And if you want to see the chickens come home to roost in this case here, just wait. Because once the world wakes up to you're trading paper that has no value with goods around the world that they're shipping to the United States, and we are, in fact, sending paper around the world, and they're sending us goods that have value, cars, coffee, bananas, and you're sending paper over there that nothing but fiat piece of paper with pictures on it. Once the world wakes up to that and goes to another currency backed up by metals, which is what intended by the framers, then this thing is over. And I will tell you what economy is going to be in vogue in the future. The economy that has a yuan, China. Because what China is doing is China is buying up the gold right now. And when they spring a currency that's based upon gold, the dollar is out of here. And when the dollar is out of here, all those dollars are circulating throughout the world. All those dollars come back to the United States. And when that happens, all the dollars that are now circulating around the world, when those dollars come back here, you have inflation way up to the ceiling, so to speak, and those dollars are completely worthless. You'll be pushing wheelbarrows of money to the store like they're doing in Zimbabwe. That's what these politicians have created. And it looks to me, based upon the fact that the Fed, under this new criminal, Jerome Powell is a new Federal Reserve chairman, took over from Janet Yellen. Go and read that article I told you about earlier. Go read that article where Janet Yellen had said that she did not raise the interest rate during the Obama administration. They raised it only one time. They didn't raise it in 2016 because we were afraid of interfering with the election of Hillary Clinton. They raised it one time in 8 years during the Obama administration. They raised it 3 times so far in 2 years with Donald Trump. And it looks like they are getting ready to bring about the collapse, the inevitable bubble bursting, because it can be blamed on the outsider. But this, if you continue to postpone it, it's still going to be a bubble that's going to burst. And the longer you postpone it, the worse the problem is going to be. But it looks like they're trying to rein it in now because they got a scapegoat. You have to have something that covers up the nature of the crisis. But this crisis is not created in the immediate time period. It's created by the fact that these politicians went back on their agreement in 1944. I hope I'm making that clear. It's clear to me. But you have to do the research in order to understand how they put this together. We absolutely do not have any money in the monetary system of this country right now. It's all debt. Everything in this country is operating right now upon debt. There is no money in the monetary system of the United States, and therefore the same thing is true around the world.
I mean, if you just want proof of this, you go to a bank and say, if you go to a bank and you had like a huge account and you had a lot of money deposited in that account, if you try to withdraw from that particular branch, likely if them and all the other branches around you won't have enough to cover it because the requirements for deposit have been so greatly lessened because it's all digitalized. It's all digital. That's all it is. Again, billions of dollars can appear and disappear within a blink. So people don't understand that. I mean, I took the economics class a few years ago, and I had a basic understanding of that until I saw illustration of that, and plus I was examining what was going on in the real markets. Boom, boom, boom. I mean, it just flips. Back and forth. Then they have the cryptocurrency. When everybody's in fury about that because people are critics of that. Well, it's all based on nothing. And actually, if you actually look at it, cryptocurrency would have more worth than our currency now because at least it's based upon the resources to maintain an account online, which means energy for the electricity and the computer infrastructure. So actually, it probably has just as much value in it as our currency does. We carry it around in our pocket.
John. These people are criminals, and they're very clever. Now, you said something about the digital, how they want to go to a digital currency, just numbers on bank books, and you go and just simply draw upon numbers where they move the numbers around. Or if you go to try to withdraw money in your account right now, the way they do it is that you have to pull out. They only let you pull out so much up to a certain point. I think if after you go to about $2,000, you got a problem pulling money out at one time. And the reason is because it's not first of all, it's not money. You can't pull out the currency. I think they have a limit about $2,000 at a time. That's because they only have 3% of the currency in circulation too. See, most of the quote unquote money, money, quotation marks around the word, is in fact digital. Most of it is in fact credit card kind of currency. You know how you're spending on these credit cards, and those credit cards is nothing other than you borrowing quote unquote money into existence as debt. And you notice that when you borrow it into existence as debt, you notice that is always interest attached to it. So then the debt you borrow into existence plus the interest that goes along with it, you'll always notice that the debt continues to increase.
And this debt, this interest you're paying, is not going to the government. It's going to the Federal Reserve, which is only quasi-semi kind of overhead oversight. Our politicians, our leaders, only have marginal oversight on what they do.
John, you're not coming through. Something happened with
okay, but that's where, basically that's what happened. I mean, the Federal Reserve is a handful of individuals.
Yeah, okay. Now I can hear you again.
Yeah. I backed off a bit because I thought I was getting too tight to the microphone. So.
Yeah, John, you're exactly right. This is a criminal enterprise. When De Lorenzo wrote the book called Organized Crime, unraveling. See, he's unraveling what you mean by organized crime. First of all crime that is in fact directed is organized. And if you don't organize a crime, then the crime comes back and hits you in the face. That's why I would say that the crime in the black community is disorganized. We black people have disorganized crime. Most persons organize their crime because then you can direct who it hits. The gangsters in Washington, and that is who they are. I'm calling them out here because that's who they are. And when you talk about the deep state, you're talking about nothing other than these criminals that are disguised. They are not who you think that they are. The deep state are these criminals who are disguised in front of the American people. And I saw these gangsters, I'm looking at these gangsters right now, that they are now talking about they want to build the wall because we need to have $5 billion to build the wall, and there are these Republicans that are raising the question and blaming the Democrats for the wall not being built when they've been in power for two years, and they control the House, they control the Senate, they have the presidency, all that is Republican, and the wall was not built. Why not? Because the gangsters in the Republican Party and these gang members in the Democratic Party, neither one of them want that wall built. What they want is open borders. And they don't bit more intend to build that wall than the man in the moon. Just like they didn't intend to repeal Obamacare. Is they took over 1/6 of the economy and placed it back in Washington and took it out of the hands of the American people. After telling the American people you could keep your doctor if you want to keep your doctor, you can keep your health care. If you like your health care, you can keep that. Did you keep it? No, they took it from you. Because these gangsters roll like that. Anything that they say, you can take it with a grain of salt. These people are criminals. And they've been like this ever since 1792 in this country. You can go back and date it for yourself. Where they were throwing people in jail for criticizing this government under John Adams. And to some extent, it got off the track even under George Washington. Because it's one thing now to have government set up ahead of time under restraints. And that's what the framers were, in fact, great at. Setting restraints upon government is a whole different can of wax when you put them in power and they become politicians. And they were no better than the politicians we have right now. As theorists and philosophers and all of that, You cannot beat Thomas Jefferson and John Jay and Alexander Hamilton. But if you're talking about Alexander Hamilton as the Secretary of the Treasury, go read the book by De Lorenzo called Hamilton's Curse. Go read that book. Because now Hamilton is a politician. It's one thing to theoretically say things, but then to then govern, that's a whole different thing. The role of the philosopher and then the role of the politician, those are two different roles. And when they began to govern, they were just as bad as they are right now, because that's who politicians are, and that's who they've been in history. It's never going to be different. It's never going to be different. If you look at, let me just say something about why they're running out of Honduras. They're running out of Honduras. Go look at the map and see the map of South America. Next to Honduras is Guatemala. You go from Guatemala, if you go to the east, you go to Belize. If you go to the west, you go up into Mexico. Why didn't they stop? Why didn't Honduras? They say they're fleeing from oppression. They're really coming for economic opportunity. But why didn't they stop if they're fleeing oppression and they need asylum, why didn't they stop in Guatemala? Or want to stop in Mexico? They didn't want to stop in Mexico either. We stopped in Mexico. But why did they stop there? Why did they stop in Belize? Why are they now in Tijuana, waiting to cross over here? I'll tell you why. It's because the founding documents of the country restrain politicians more here than they restrain anywhere else on the globe. Not that they're willing to live with those restraints, but because the restraints are known up to an extent, there are certain things that they cannot do out in the open, and that explains the deep state, by the way. The deep state is explained by the fact that they have to do a lot of their injury to the American people behind the scenes, behind the American people's back. And that's what I'm talking about with this monetary system. There is no money in the system. There's only debt in the system. These criminals have bagged the money out, and what they put in the place of the money is they put debt there. And what you're walking around with in your pocket right now, those of you that's trying to answer that question put out by Capital One, what's in your wallet? What's in your wallet is debt. And that debt in your wallet is in two forms. One is the dollars, which was borrowed into existence at the Federal Reserve level. I wish I had enough time to go into that. But it's borrowed into existence at a 6% markup. So all the currency that you have in circulation, which is only between 3% and 5% of the monetary supply, because most of it is not in that form. Most of the debt, and it's all debt, whether it's the currency in your pocket or the credit card, they're the flip side of the same coin. The dollars is debt, and the credit card is obviously debt. And the debt on the credit card does not exist until you go to the store. And when you go to the store or to the gas station and you put that card in there, then that money, quote unquote, is borrowed into existence. It does not exist before you do that. Before you go to your favorite grocery store and pay that money on credit, that money does not exist. It's borrowed into existence. And when it's borrowed into existence, it's debt. If you don't think it's borrowed into existence as debt, then why do you, 30 days later, get a notice of indebtedness, plus if you don't pay it off within 30 days, they attach the interest to it. Why do they do that? Because the interest is on debt that's borrowed. You cannot have debt created without an interest charge to it. So you might ask the question then, why don't you pay an interest on the paper currency? Here's the answer to that question. You don't pay interest on the paper currency because the debt on the paper currency was paid when the money was borrowed into existence at the federal level. In other words, when that paper was created as quote unquote money, really currency, but not money, but paper used as money, it is all the interest has already been added to that currency being born into existence. So there's 6% markup on that. So then the other thing you need to know then is anyone that is saying you're going to pay off the debt. Let's say they're talking in Washington about we're going to pay off the national debt. Nonsense. You tell me how you're going to pay off the national debt when the debt is all of the debt born into existence and then the interest attached to it, which is not borrowed into existence. Understand this point well. If you borrow the currency into existence, if on the credit card you borrow other debt into existence and you attach the interest onto it, you never will have the interest to pay off the debt because the debt is born into existence without the interest being born into existence. In other words, the interest doesn't exist. Only the debt exists. The interest on the debt does not exist. That's how clever they are. You cannot pay off the debt. So what is the federal government doing to hide this problem? They are, in fact, not paying the debt off. What they are doing is that they are paying this. What they are doing is servicing the debt, and they are servicing the debt by paying only the interest payment. The problem with that is, as we are beginning to increase the debt by $300 billion a day, $300 billion a day, what's going to happen when the service of the debt will equal the level of the G of when the taxation only meets the obligation of servicing the debt, and you're raising $4 trillion of tax, quote unquote tax, and servicing the debt is $4 trillion. What's going to happen when you're going to take all the taxation to service the debt? Where is the money going to come from to pay for these entitlements? Another scam they got going is a scam about shutting down the government. Everybody's so scared because the government shut down, what was it, midnight 2 or 3 days ago, 25% of the government shut down. Have you noticed that nothing stopped? Mueller's investigation didn't stop. All of the payments of coming out of the government's debt center, that didn't stop. The printing of currency didn't stop. The Medicare and Medicaid, those payments didn't stop. Nothing stopped. What they did was in front of the American people, they laid off they furloughed 25% of the non-essential workers in government, with the idea of bringing them back after this charade of the government shutting down is over. They're going to all get their back pay, quote unquote, through this currency stream. They haven't shut anything down. The government doesn't shut down. My question to them would be how much of the government must shut down in order to shut down the pay of the members of the Congress? How much more needs to be shut down in order to shut down the pay that goes to these criminals that are getting paid at our expense? In other words, they are criminalizing the government, and they have the taxpayers paying them a salary for it. They are destroying this country and getting paid for it. Some of the biggest criminals on the planet are these politicians. And we are paying them a salary for doing what they're doing, and what they're doing is they're destroying this country from within. All of them, every last one of them. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about Democrats or Republicans. The idea they're Democrats or Republican is another farce. There are no Democrats in Congress, and there are no Republicans in Congress. There's only the parties that have set themselves in these gang groups, one in this gang, another in the other gang, and they're calling them, okay, John, they're calling them Democrats and Republicans. It's not just, you're not what you are because you call yourself that. The question is, which of the parties represent the democratic ideal, that the American people will vote themselves by a majority of people being on one side of an issue, they're able to then rule the roost by a majority of people wanting to go down this road. Or a Republican form of government, they have voted themselves to go down another road. Who believes that to be the case? There are no Democrats. There are no Republicans, only gangsters. And they are going to eventually bring this system down because they cannot continue this charade forever. At some point, this currency being increased more and more and more, eventually is going to collapse of its own weight. Because every fiat currency in history has gone down to a value of zero, and is the money system through which every country eventually has imploded from within. From the beginning of time all the way up to the present time, it's been the lack of virtue in the money supply that's brought about the downing of those economies, of those countries. And the same things happened in history is happening here. Mark my word for it. This country is going down from the same reason it's gone down throughout the history of the world. And these criminals disguised here are doing the same thing here they've done through history. Okay, I got to get out of here. The rant is over. But mark my words, we got a problem here. And it's not in Houston. Okay, until next week, I want you to follow your dream. Because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.